Life has a knack for surprising you when you least expect it, doesn't it? That's precisely what occurred to me on an otherwise ordinary Wednesday evening. I had just returned home from work, the sound of my heels echoing on the hardwood floor as I stepped inside. The day had been long and exhausting, and all I wanted was to relax in a warm bath, letting the stress fade away. Little did I know, that evening would turn into a defining moment, altering the direction of my life forever. Make sure to subscribe to my channel so I can keep sharing engaging and heartfelt stories like this one. Stay until the end and show your support by liking this video. Trust me, this is a story you won't want to miss. When I got home, the house was silent, which wasn't unusual. My husband Thomas had mentioned earlier that he'd be at a late meeting. He had been working late a lot recently, putting in extra hours to meet a crucial project deadline. This often left just Logan, Thomas's son from his previous marriage, at home. Logan, 20, was a quiet but likable young man who rarely caused any issues. He worked part-time at the local hardware store and spent most of his free time in his room. While we weren't especially close, we had a respectful relationship built on mutual understanding. I always saw him as someone who valued his privacy and solitude, much like his father. I had grown used to the quiet atmosphere of the house when it was just the two of us. As I set my bag on the kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of water, I noticed Logan's pickup truck in the driveway. Strange, I thought. He usually worked late shifts. Casually, I called out his name, my voice echoing through the still house. No answer. I didn't think much of it, assuming he was in his room, perhaps listening to music or taking a nap. After finishing my drink, I went upstairs to change into something more comfortable. After such a tiring day, all I wanted was to rest. As I passed the bathroom, I heard the faint sound of running water and noticed the door slightly ajar. This struck me as odd. Logan was usually very careful about his privacy and always made sure doors were fully closed, especially the bathroom door. My curiosity piqued. I paused briefly before gently pushing the door open a little more. What I saw made me freeze. Logan stood at the sink, his back to me, his posture stiff, as if he were deeply focused on something. His movements were quick and awkward. I realized he was shirtless, his pants hanging loosely at his hips, and he seemed to be scrubbing something with a washcloth out of view. The creak of the door startled him, and he turned around, his eyes wide with alarm. "Oh my God, I didn't hear you come in," he said, his voice shaking. I stood frozen, equally shocked. My eyes darted between him and the washcloth, an uneasy feeling settling over me. This wasn't what I had expected to see, and guilt washed over me for intruding. "I'm so sorry," I mumbled, looking away. I didn't mean to interrupt. I quickly stepped back, my heart racing as I reached for the doorknob, ready to leave and give him the privacy he clearly wanted. But before I could close the door, Logan's voice stopped me. "Wait," he pleaded, his tone filled with desperation. "It's not what you think." I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Part of me wanted to leave and pretend nothing had happened, but another part was curious. His voice didn't sound offensive, like someone caught doing something wrong. Instead, it was filled with shame and distress. Against my better judgment, I turned to face him again, keeping my expression calm. "Okay," I said cautiously. "What's going on?" Logan's eyes dropped to the floor, his cheeks turning a deep red. He seemed to struggle to find the right words, fumbling with the washcloth in his hands. Finally, he let out a long breath and confessed. I just didn't know who else to turn to. "What do you mean?" I asked gently, my curiosity growing despite the awkwardness of the situation. He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. "It's personal," he admitted quietly. "I've been dealing with something and I don't know what to do. Dad's not here, and you're the only person I could think to talk to." His vulnerability caught me off guard. Logan was usually very independent, rarely opening up about personal matters. The fact that he was seeking my help gave me pause. I stepped into the bathroom, closing the door slightly to give us some privacy. "All right," I said softly, keeping my tone steady. "Why don't you tell me what's going on?" Logan hesitated for a moment before starting to explain. At first, his words were fragmented and hesitant. He struggled to express the pain he was feeling. I listened carefully, trying to make sense of his words. It quickly became clear that this was a sensitive topic, one he felt too uncomfortable to discuss with his dad. As he opened up, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of empathy. Seeking help, especially about something so personal, is never easy. I noticed the tension in his eyes, a clear struggle between wanting assistance and fearing judgment. "All right," I said after a moment of thought. "First of all, it's great that you're paying attention to these things. It shows that you care about your well-being. Second, there's no shame in asking questions or seeking advice." Logan looked up at me, gratitude and relief shining in his eyes. "Really? You don't think this is weird?" "Not at all," I assured him. "Everyone has questions about their bodies from time to time. It's completely normal." For the next several minutes, I offered him the best guidance I could, drawing from my own experiences and understanding. I made sure to keep the discussion as open and direct as possible, steering clear of anything that might make him feel more uneasy. It was clear that our talk had lifted a burden off his shoulders, even though it started with some awkwardness. As we continued, the initial discomfort faded, and Logan appeared to relax, relieved to have someone to share his thoughts with. By the end of our conversation, he even managed a small smile. "Thank you," he said quietly, almost in a whisper. "I didn't think I could tell anyone about this." I smiled back. "You're welcome, Logan. Remember, it's always okay to ask for help. No one has all the answers." As I left the bathroom, I was filled with a mix of emotions. On one hand, I felt grateful to have been there for Logan when he needed someone to listen. On the other, the situation had been so unexpected and unusual that I wasn't sure how to process it. There was something significant about that moment, as if it marked a shift in our relationship. I just didn't know what it meant or how it would unfold in the coming days. I tried to push the strange feeling aside as I went about my evening, but it lingered in the back of my mind, like a shadow. The house was quiet, the only sound being the soft hum of the air conditioner. Thomas came home late that night, tired but content, completely unaware of the unusual conversation that had taken place in his absence. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Something had changed, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. All I knew was that life in our home would never feel quite the same again. The days following that unexpected encounter were, in their own way, peculiar. On the surface, everything seemed normal. Thomas continued with his routines, Logan kept up with his part-time job and studies, and I juggled my responsibilities at home and work. Yet beneath the surface, there was an unspoken tension between Logan and me, a subtle awareness of each other's vulnerabilities. It wasn't just that we were more mindful of one another. Something deeper had shifted, and I wasn't sure how to navigate it. Logan had always been somewhat reserved, keeping much of his life private. Our interactions, though polite, had rarely gone beyond surface-level pleasantries. Now, after our conversation in the bathroom, I sensed a newfound connection between us, both unsettling and oddly comforting. I found myself thinking about him more than I probably should, not in a maternal or concerned way, but with a sense of surprise at how I had failed to truly see him before. It was as though I was seeing Logan in a completely new light. He wasn't just the quiet young man who often kept to himself. There was a deep emotional complexity within him that I was only beginning to understand. Logan's behavior changed noticeably on Friday evening. Thomas had gone out to meet a client, and I was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Logan hadn't returned yet from his shift at the hardware store. As I chopped vegetables, I heard the sound of his pickup truck pulling into the driveway. My hand froze mid-air, the knife still in my grip as I hesitated, unsure of how to greet him. The unease that had settled between us over the past few days had created a barrier I didn't know how to break. When the front door opened, I called out, "Hey, Logan!" aiming for a casual tone. He didn't reply immediately, but I heard his footsteps approaching the kitchen. He looked tired but offered a faint smile. "Hey," he said softly. "What's for dinner?" I returned his smile, relieved that he didn't seem as distant as he had been lately. Just some spaghetti. Are you hungry? Yes, I am, he answered, stepping over to grab a glass of water. We ate mostly in silence at first, the only sound being the clinking of forks against plates. Gradually, though, I noticed Logan becoming more at ease. His smiles were less forced and his posture wasn't as tense. At one point, he set his fork down and glanced at me, a slight blush on his cheeks. I've been thinking about what you said the other night, he began. I paused, surprised but eager to hear more. And? I asked gently. I just wanted to thank you again for listening, he said, meeting my gaze. The sincerity in his voice warmed me. This was the moment I had been waiting for, unsure of how to reach it, but relieved he felt comfortable enough to share. Of course, Logan, I replied softly. I'm glad I could help. A stretch of silence followed, but this time it felt less awkward. For the first time in days, it felt like we were having a real conversation, instead of just exchanging polite words. You've always been kind to me, he said, his voice quieter now. And I don't want you to think I take it for granted. I nodded, struggling to express how much his words meant. I know it's not always easy, I said after a moment, but I'm glad you feel you can talk to me. He smiled, more relaxed now. I'll try to keep that in mind, he said, reaching for another helping of spaghetti. Dinner gradually became more casual. We discussed his studies, his part-time job, and a new Netflix series we were both following. It was a small step forward, but progress nonetheless. Logan was beginning to open up, even if only in small ways. Later that night, after we finished eating, I stretched out on the couch with a book. Logan retreated to his room, his footsteps light on the floor. As I turned a page, I found myself wondering if he was still reflecting on what we had discussed. The next few days followed a similar rhythm. Thomas came home later each evening, his work increasingly demanding. Logan, while more comfortable around me, still kept to himself for the most part. Our dinners were brief but meaningful, and I could see him gradually letting his guard down. Still, there was an underlying tension neither of us seemed ready to confront. Then, one quiet evening, about a week after our talk, Logan did something completely unexpected. It was late, nearing bedtime, and I was curled up on the couch watching the latest episode of a drama. Logan suddenly appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I sat up immediately, my heart racing. "Of course, come in." He hesitated for a moment before stepping fully into the room. He appeared uneasy, his posture stiff as if uncertain how to start. "What's on your mind?" I asked gently, hoping to make him feel comfortable. Logan shifted his weight from one foot to the other, briefly avoiding my gaze before finally speaking. "I've been thinking about what I shared with you, and I feel like I need to tell Dad. I'm not sure how, but I think he should know what I'm going through." His words surprised me. He was being more open now than ever before. This was progress. He was taking ownership of his feelings and recognizing that he needed Thomas's support, not just mine. I smiled, hoping to encourage him. "Logan, that's a big step. I think Thomas will really appreciate you opening up to him. It's not easy, but it's important." He nodded, his eyes meeting mine. There was a flicker of gratitude in his expression, and I could tell that deciding to talk to Thomas had been difficult for him, but he had come a long way. "I don't want to make things weird between us," he said quietly. "I know things have been different lately." I shook my head, feeling a wave of warmth toward him. "It's not weird at all, Logan. We're family, and no matter what, we always support each other." He gave me a small smile and nodded before turning to leave. "Thank you for everything," he said over his shoulder as he walked out. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I felt a deep sense of pride for him. He was learning to express himself, seek help, and manage his emotions in a healthy way. I couldn't help but feel I was witnessing a significant moment in his growth. The next day, Thomas came home from work earlier than usual. He looked tired, but his steps were light as he walked in. "Hey," he said, dropping his briefcase by the door. "How's everything going?" "Good," I replied with a smile. "But I think Logan's been thinking about something." Thomas raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? He's been more open lately, I explained, and he mentioned he wants to talk to you about something important. Thomas's expression softened, a mix of concern and curiosity on his face. I'll talk to him, he said calmly, his voice steady. Thanks for letting me know. That evening, after dinner, Thomas and Logan sat together in the living room. I couldn't hear much of their conversation, but I saw Logan leaning forward, speaking earnestly to his father. Thomas listened carefully, his face showing both worry and affection. It was clear that Logan's transition into adulthood was a pivotal moment in their relationship, and Thomas was ready to meet him there. As the weeks passed, life returned to its usual rhythm. Logan's once tense demeanor relaxed. He no longer avoided me, and while I could tell he was still processing everything, he seemed lighter and more like himself. Thomas and Logan spent more time together, strengthening their bond, and Thomas was clearly making an effort to be more present for his son. One weekend, Thomas suggested we take a day trip to the lake. It was his way of bringing us closer, and I thought it was a great idea. The weather was perfect, clear blue skies and a gentle breeze. We packed lunch, drove to the lake, and spent the day relaxing and having fun. We swam, played frisbee, and enjoyed the beach. Logan seemed genuinely happy, smiling and joking with Thomas in a way I hadn't seen before. Watching them interact filled me with joy, and I hoped this trip would mark a positive turning point for all of us. As the sun began to set, casting golden light over the lake, we sat on the beach, savouring the last moments of the day. Thomas had fallen asleep on a blanket, his snores blending with the sound of the waves. Logan and I sat a few feet apart, gazing at the horizon. Thank you for coming today, he said after a long silence. It's been nice just spending time together. I smiled, feeling a sense of peace. I'm glad we came. We should do things like this more often. He nodded, his eyes fixed on the water. Yeah, I think it helps. We sat quietly for a while longer, an unspoken understanding filling the stillness. When Thomas woke up, we gathered our things and headed home, filled with laughter and memories from the day. That night, as I lay in bed next to Thomas, I thought about how far we had come as a family. The past 2 weeks had been challenging, but they had also brought us closer in ways I hadn't expected. Logan's journey was far from over, but I was confident that he, and all of us, were moving in the right direction.